Where'd the name Palace of the King come from?
It actually comes from the old blues song played by
Ah,
Freddie King. So um, we it came about as the name of the band because we 3 and a bit years ago, sort of late 2012, when we started getting the band together and playing a few shows. We did a couple of midweek shows at Revolver in Paran,
hmm
just to basically rehearse on a stage in front of an audience and test out some of the songs that we've been writing at that point. And at that point, without a band name, we were just sort of getting up unnamed and making some noise. We were playing a small portion of the song Palace of the King because it was just a common influence of ours at that point, and most of us personally had only come together through the band, and didn't have a long history together beyond just getting in the rehearsal room and creating this band. So that was a cool song that we all dug at the time, and we were playing at those early gigs, and it was actually a drunk punter at one of the gigs we played. He came up to us and he recognised the Freddie King song "Palace of the King," and he recognised that we didn't have a band name at that point and recommended it in his drunken state. And he would have woken up the next morning and probably didn't even know that he'd seen a band. He was that wasted, but he had a pretty bloody good idea. So pretty much from that point, we sort of all looked at each other and kind of wondered why we hadn't thought of it, and then did the Google search, which is pretty key these days, just to find out if someone in on the other side of the world has already taken the name and created a Facebook page or something like that, and it seemed to be available, so we grabbed it and stuck with it.
okay, cool. The guy's got his place in rock history now. He doesn't even know it.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be funny. I mean, the funny thing is, I wouldn't know who the guy was if I ran into him tomorrow. But yeah, just a funny sort of chance scenario where he'd obviously had enough beers to think that telling us what our band should be named was a good idea, and he came up with a great idea. So
Yeah,
we're thankful for that guy.
yeah, it kind of transcends a few different decades of music. You got the classic blues, and then you got the psychedelic '70s rock, and it all works together into the package you're delivering.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that we certainly hope over the last few years we've written and released quite a lot of music as well, which we hope we're just throughout that process, slowly but surely, developing something that we're finding our own little niche pocket um, within that whole landscape and our own sound. So that's yeah, all the old blues and early rock and roll and yeah, sort of 60s, 70s. They're certainly the golden eras that we grew up listening to, and it's certainly reflected in the music. We're more than happy to for that to be the case. It was the best of the best in
Yeah,
that sort of era, as
can't go
far as we're
wrong.
concerned.
Can't go wrong with referencing those decades as the influences for your band.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you've toured overseas, most recently in Spain, France, and Germany. How were the audience reacting to your band over there?
yeah, really good. There's the really good thing about the state of Australian rock music at the moment. It's a lot of people may not recognise in Australia, but overseas Australian rock music has a really good name and reputation, and I'm sure that a lot of the audiences came out based purely on the fact that we were a rock band from Australia. Um, but yeah, it was really cool. I mean, especially so we had some shows in Spain, in France, in Germany, and there were shows in every country that went over really well, and there were moments where just the classic European audience type vibe of the audience singing a guitar riff back at you like a
Uh,
soccer chant and things like that. It was in terms of the reception, we couldn't have expected it or hoped for it to be any better, and we can't wait to capitalise on that and get back over there as soon as possible.
that's awesome. Um, Why do you think the European market is so accepting of the Australian bands? Where Australia, we have the punters that go out and see bands, but it's not as recognised over here as overseas.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to put your finger on, because there's obviously a lot of really great. There's a lot of current European bands that I love as well. So
Yeah.
it's not as if they've got any shortage of rock and roll in their own territory, for bands that have been brought up in Sweden and the UK, obviously, and Germany. But I think, generally speaking, I mean, we, and this is more feedback from promoters that we met during our time over there. But Australian bands are, by the sounds of it, a hell of a lot more willing to tour and travel and do the hard yards, as compared to some European bands, purely because Australian bands, we're comfortable doing the 10-hour drive between gigs from night to night, because of the things like the trip from Melbourne to Sydney is such a long distance, as compared to a lot of the European cities. The shows are only 3 or 4 hours apart, and we were getting there every single night ready to fire, sort of thing. And that's seems to be the feedback we got from lots of promoters about Australian bands, that they can sort of put the planning for a tour and dates that may be routed really strangely, or there might be 10-hour drives between gigs that most bands would normally ask for a day off to do the 10-hour drive across 2 days or something like that. And yeah, I think promoters have the opinion of Australian bands that they go over there and are ready to tour and work, basically. So I don't know if that is reflected in the quality of the shows or the reception of the audiences or anything like that, but I think at the absolute rawest form, they're appreciative of a band coming from the other side of the world to play some music and give these guys a good night out, basically.
Cool. It's cool that Australian bands have such a good reputation overseas too, so a lot of people will be happy to bring them over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a lot of the people we met in, regardless of country, their knowledge of Australian music, both current and the history of Australian rock music, is incredible. We were talking after shows with people in Spain about Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs,
Wow.
and Stevie Wright, and these guys that from our point of view, that you almost look at them as unsung heroes, sort of thing. That they potentially, in a lot of ways, didn't get the props that they truly deserve in terms of what they created for Australian music. But these guys just go absolutely crazy for Australian music and dig so deep into it that they're right on top of all the current bands that are on the scene. And like I said, they dig right back into the history of Australian music and are right into it. So yeah, it's a really cool vibe when you go over there and you're able to speak to someone in Spain or Germany in broken English about, like I said, Billy Thorpe or Stevie Wright or Buffalo or something super obscure like that. It's really cool.
That is cool. It's kind of sad in a way because it reflects over here in Australia. We've got so many great bands that are known the world over, like AC/DC, Midnight Oil. I could rattle off a massive list. But if you ask the average person these days about a new band, they wouldn't know any new Australian bands, yet everyone overseas do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's coming back to your question before about the reception for Australian bands overseas. I think that's a key area that Australian radio, and we certainly get some fantastic support from community radio and more grassroots radio stations. But for new Australian bands, it's really hard to sort of break into a larger market through larger radio stations, whether that be Triple M being the most obvious commercial rock radio station, or the Triple J and their willingness to play rock and roll music and all that sort of stuff is something that doesn't seem to be their type of angle at the moment. So that's something that a lot of Australian bands are relying on, the sort of grassroots support and the community radio support in Australia, which obviously doesn't reach as large a market as the bigger commercial stations. But that's not the case in Europe. There's countless radio stations that support and play the living hell out of brand new rock and roll bands from all over the world, and get the music into people's ears, which is obviously key to breaking open new markets and having places to tour and play shows.
Yeah. Do you think it's because Australia only has one real rock radio station that they got no competition, so people have just become kind of complacent to hearing the same old songs over and over?
I think so. Yeah, I mean that's in terms of regardless of specifically talking about rock music, that having had the experience now of being over there, that was something that you notice straight away, that the options that people have for seeking out music and turning the dial on the radio station. There's countless rock stations over there that are supportive of different bands at different levels, and you don't need to have had a record that sold 100,000 copies before you get a look in on commercial radio, and getting your music pushed to a bigger audience. It sort of seems that with so few options in Australia, that bands need to have sold the records before their single gets played on the radio, which it's kind of the opposite way in Europe, where the stations kind of take pride in championing a new band that have just put out their first album or something along those lines, and almost helping the band push towards selling records. It's sort of seems to be the other way around over there.
Interesting. Do you think there's a lot of nostalgia in Australia with the audiences, or older audiences?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I'm a music fan myself, and I still want to go to gigs and pick up records and hear new music that's a new experience and something. I want to hear bands making things that are just new territory and knocking down new doors. So, I mean, there's the aspect of nostalgia in that there's certainly a part of our audience who like what we do because they can hear the bands that they grew up on. I guess in the music and in the vibe of the band or whatever it may be. But we certainly hope that there's people who are hearing something new when they hear Palace of the King, and there's plenty of bands out there that I'm digging at the moment. There's lots of great Australian bands and Melbourne bands that are doing their own thing and really doing a good job of introducing new things and giving a new spin to obviously the age-old formula of rock and roll. So it's really hard one to answer in terms of what I think the audience expects or wants to hear, but I certainly know that that's as a music fan myself, not necessarily the case.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment. Certainly an exciting time when there's so many great bands going.
Yeah, absolutely. And the really cool thing, it sort of feels for us at the moment as though we're part of a bit of a scene of Melbourne bands and Australian bands who are really pushing hard to break markets overseas, and that's that can only be something that's mutually beneficial for all of us. We've got friends in like Dead City Ruins and King of the North, and bands like Dallas Frasca and Child. They've all toured Europe within the last 12 months, and then the Lazies from up in Sydney. They're another really good rock and roll band who have been breaking ground and putting in the hard yards over in Canada, which is a totally different territory. But it's certainly the really cool thing is we even notice on our Facebook page that we are hearing from Canadians who have become aware of us because the Lazies have opened their eyes to Australian rock music, and they've sort of like those Spanish dudes that we'd be speaking to after shows, they've just dug a bit deeper into the Australian music scene and come across bands like us, which is awesome.
That is awesome. That's what it is, man. It's just one band that cracks the market, and then people start looking for other bands like that, and it brings more people back to Melbourne and Australia, and it just branches out from there.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people look for something that's replicable, sort of thing. So as soon as a band comes out of the UK or Australia, wherever it may be, all of a sudden that's all it takes half the time for people to start digging a little bit deeper. So yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's mutually beneficial for for a lot of Australian bands at the moment. That there are quite a few Melbourne-based, Sydney-based Australian rock bands, especially, who are putting in a lot of hard yards to push overseas and bringing, obviously, exposure to their own music, but Australian music as a whole is seemingly becoming a lot stronger and prominent as a result, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. So when you guys are writing a song, do you guys write individually and bring it into a rehearsal, or do you just kind of jam as a group and something comes out of that?
For the most part, we normally get pretty much a full song or a full bed of a song together instrumentally, and then Tim will take that away and write and record vocals for it. In terms of the instrumentals, I mean, one of us will simply have an idea, just a riff or two. It's not that common that someone will come in with a full song where they've got 3 or 4 riffs and it's all arranged and ready to go. We tend to prefer to get in there with just a really raw idea and have a crack at it, see how it feels, and develop it from there. In more of a jam. Everyone sort of throw their 2 cents in type of sense. So that's sort of been the formula for everything that we've done so far in terms of completing instrumentals and then Tim finishing the vocals from there. And it's worked really well. It's potentially something that we may turn on its head and try different ways of writing songs in the future. But for now, it's ticking along nicely and working really well for us.
That's it. If it doesn't itch, don't scratch it.
Yeah, exactly. It's where I guess in a lot of ways we've all at various points been through times where writing songs and coming up with new ideas doesn't come so easy. The old writer's block or something like that, where it's you might go through a real drought for a couple of months of really struggling to come up with something that you're into. So at the moment, it's all just ticking along really nicely and flowing really well. So we're just sort of running with it. And like you said, if it's working at the moment, there's no reason to change it until it stops working, really.
In terms of lyrics, would you say your songs are purely for a bit of rock and roll fun, or is there a bit of a serious edge to them at some point?
I think, it's definitely Tim who writes all of the lyrics. So, I can't speak on behalf of him, but my perception of the lyrics and what I take from the lyrics is that I think the tone of the songs just gradually, over the last few years and with each release we put out, has gradually changed. I mean, it certainly, at the core, at our shows, we want people to come and have a good night and rock out with us. So the underlying theme is, like you said, just good old rock and roll type. I wouldn't say lyrics because, like I said, it's Tim that handles most of that sort of stuff. But the tone of it is certainly that. But we've actually, it's, to me, it sort of seemed to take a bit of a change or a different direction probably halfway through writing the album that we put out last year. And there was a few songs that were a little bit darker musically and a little bit heavier, which I think Tim just sort of naturally, through the vibe of the music, saw fit to take things in a slightly different, slightly darker direction. By no means doom metal direction or anything like that, but yeah, certainly a bit of a change of tone probably for the appropriate 3 or 4 songs on the record, and through continuing to write over the last 6-12 months, that's a trend that seems to have continued a little bit, just purely based on the vibe and the feel of the music, I guess.
It's good. It gives a bit of contrast and a bit of area to explore in different directions going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the same way of doing things and writing songs, and the same concepts and topics of lyrical content and things like that. It does get tiring if you're just treading the same ground and jogging on the spot. So, musically, we're always, trying to challenge ourselves and do new things and experiment a little bit, without steering too far off course. And I think that's the same for Tim as well. That there's only so many different ways you can sing about a woman in a red dress, or the old blues concept, or whatever it may be. So we certainly hope that, especially moving forward from this point, that things continue to develop and just gradually sort of find their own little pocket in the musical landscape.
Cool. A lot of bands are taking the independent road these days. According to your Facebook page, you guys are on Listenable Records and Devil's Music Records.
Yes.
What does what does a record label mean to a band these days?
I think to firstly touch on Devil's Music Records. That's just basically us giving a fancy name to us releasing our record independently.
Cool.
In Australia and certain territories of the world where we're not otherwise signed to a label. With Listenable Records, that's been really good for us in Europe and the UK. The main thing that we've really benefited from working with Listenable is really the ability to have our music promoted, have a bit of awareness of the band over on the other side of the world, and therefore that almost single-handedly opened doors directly for us to go over there and tour, which is exactly what happened last October. I think we were locking in tour dates within a week of signing the deal itself with Listenable. So that was the main motivator for us. That it was a avenue for us to have a bit of awareness over there, and it was an avenue for us to be looking at touring and to be locking in touring and getting over there and promoting our live show. So that's certainly been the biggest thing for us that would have been a bit more difficult, I guess, had we been doing it independently. We were going to do it one way or another, and it was going to happen, and we were going to get over there to tour off our own bat. It may have just taken an extra 12, 18 months potentially if Listenable hadn't have come on board at that point. So that was the main motivator from the word go, and it's proved to be something that was a good decision, and got our album released in Europe and got the awareness, and then got on the road. So that was exactly what we wanted to achieve out of it.
Okay, cool. There seems to be a lot of little independent record companies springing up again, like there was back in the 50s and 60s before it was all about the money, and these people don't have that much money, but they're more passionate about music than some of the bigger corporations would have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting. Obviously, in the last 60 years, for example, obviously the way that music is serviced and radio and a lot of areas of the way people hear and experience music have changed an incredible amount. But it's also really funny to see how cyclical certain things are, and like you mentioned, that does seem to be something that at the moment a lot of the major labels, their foundations seem to be falling to a certain extent, and it does seem to be the more grassroots, smaller, independent labels that they're not doing it for the same reason, I guess, that bands are touring at the moment. there's very few bands out there um, who are not touring for anything but the love of doing so. Because if you're getting into music with the expectation of making a quick buck, then you're going to be shocked very quickly, basically. So the cool thing is that a lot of these labels have exactly the same attitude towards it, in that they're, it's not a big money business for them. It really is a passion project. They're only working with bands that they love and that they really want to get behind, and that really does create a really good two-way relationship between band and label. And obviously the fact that they're smaller is that half the time, you might be talking to the A&R guy at the label, who is the CEO of the label as well. So, it's a lot more in-house, and a smaller circle of, label people and people that a band would be working with. And as a result, you're building better relationships, and seem to be working together a lot better than I can imagine it would have been with, a label that has 2,000 employees or something along those lines. So, yeah, it'd be cool. I think music's obviously changed a lot over the last 10 years with downloading and all that sort of stuff. But I think the next 10 years is exciting, because people aren't going to live without music. Music is not going to die, and the music business, in its current form, may very well die, but it'll build itself back up in some other format or some other way that's sustainable, and there'll be a lot of changes, no doubt, but it'll be really cool, and hopefully for the better.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting over the next 10 years to see what if there's going to be a new norm or whatever, or different types of business senses, for lack of a better term, is going to turn out to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, it's there's obviously a lot of different subscription services with streaming and all that sort of stuff, which even 5 years ago, the concept of paying to stream songs may have been laughed at, but obviously, Spotify and Apple have just sort of done their new streaming service, which I don't know too much about, because I'm still, a record and CD and have physical copy
Me too.
type music listener myself. But it's something, like I said, I think I am maybe naively of the belief that music's not just going to die. Something will happen that will change the norm and change the cycle and create a situation where bands aren't finding themselves 5 or 10 years into career just having to dissolve because they just can't continue to go on tour and lose money and do all these sorts of things, which it's, you see that sort of stuff happening now, that bands are breaking up just through not being able to tour and persevere and have a sustainable career. So it's, I think I'd be surprised if there's not some changes and a new norm somewhere in the not too distant future.
So for Palace of the King, what's coming up in the next 6 months?
Quite a bit, hopefully. We've had a few irons on the fire and a few things simmering under the surface for quite a while, which probably over the next month or two we'll be announcing quite a bit that we've sort of had under our hat for a little while now. But the next thing is on Saturday the 30th of January, we've got our single launch for the third single, White Bird, off our album at Cherry Bar in Melbourne. Then we've got a couple of shows with Buck Cherry in March, which should be cool to play in front of a bigger rock and roll audience. In Melbourne and Sydney. We're over to the States in April, which will be really cool, which you may very well be the first person outside of the band to become aware of that. But
Okay.
That's something that we've had sort of in the works for a little while, and was absolutely locked in a couple of weeks ago. So that's going to be exciting to get over there. to somewhere that we've never toured before, and hopefully kick a few doors down, and put a bit of groundwork in over in the States as well. So, beyond that, with lots and lots of touring, we'll be back over to Europe at some point in probably the second half of this year, and we're currently just putting the finishing touches on another record. It's totally recorded, nearly mixed, and then after that we'll just have the mastering, and then we can officially call that one in the can as well. So, that's something that we've touched on before, just sort of the 60s and 70s era model of bands, and that's something that we see as, especially at the moment, being largely an independent band, and in Europe, obviously, we're on a smaller niche label that there's absolutely no reason we can't just continue releasing an album a year until the schedule's too busy and we're playing 320 shows a year and we just can't fit it in. But that's that new record's also something that we're really excited about putting out. Hopefully at some point in May or June this year, it's looking like, which will be cool.